for those like Cynthia Aguilar, who I met this fall at the University of Oregon in Eugene. She spoke eloquently about how her mother sacrificed so much for her, living paycheck to paycheck so Cynthia could have an education and a better life. It is real for those like Eastern Oregon University student Daisy Bedoya, who spoke just as movingly when we met in Portland, as well as at LeGrand at a town hall I held at her community. Not only does Daisy talk about the huge contributions Dreamers are making to their hometowns, to college campuses, she demonstrates her contributions each day at Eastern Oregon University as the school's student body president. Cynthia, Daisy, and so many others are what I call the real dream team. And I am proud to be their teammate in this fundamental fight for fairness. It is not a small fight. In Oregon alone, there are an estimated 11,000 Dreamers, enough to fill most every seat in the Memorial Coliseum. And every one of those young people has parents and brothers and sisters and friends in their communities. They have well-laid plans to work hard in school, make something of their lives, and start families of their own in the United States. The strength of their stories fuels our fight, and that is why I join colleagues today in insisting that the DREAM Act come to the floor of this Senate. This has been a long battle. I'm proud to have been with the Dreamers every step of the way, from DREAM Act legislation to the President Obama's actions on DACA. I'm also pleased to have worked with my colleagues to introduce legislation like the Protect Dreamer Confidentiality Act. This bill would ensure that the information the Dreamers provide to the government isn't somehow used against them for immigration enforcement. Congress has to come together and work in a bipartisan way on a fair path forward for Dreamers. This effort from the White House to punish innocent young people and split families goes against the values that we cherish as Americans and further divides our country. These children have known nothing, Mr. President, but the United States as home. They have done nothing wrong and everything right. They deserve an opportunity to stay here. Our government made a promise to Dreamers when we encouraged them to share their stories publicly, submit to background checks, and pay taxes. It would be wrong to go back on that promise now. So I'm pleased to be on this floor to say that we are just going to battle every step along the way until there is justice done for the Dreamers. Now, Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Moran, who graciously gave me some time, and I want to briefly talk about one other subject. I'm the ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, pleased to serve with my colleague from Louisiana, who also serves on the committee, and will be a conferee on the tax bill. And just want to bring up a matter that the President introduced yesterday. The President has long said that there's going to be a fantastic tax bill, his words, not mine, and obviously the American people don't see it that way. Overwhelmingly, we see in surveys, I saw it in town hall meetings over the weekend, in a community Hillary Clinton won, in a community where Donald Trump was extremely popular, this tax bill was incredibly unpopular. Now, the President admitted yesterday, and I'm going to quote here, there was a tiny little sliver of Americans who, as he said, just through circumstances, maybe don't get the full benefit of the tax bill. Well, I'm not sure what tax plan he's talking about, but it sure can't be the one that hikes taxes on middle-class folks that Republicans are working out in the conference right now. So I want to get to the numbers just briefly from the independent, nonpartisan referees at the Joint Committee on Taxation. These are the folks that we pay. And I'm telling you, the numbers they've given us really aren't in line with what the President is talking about when he says only a tiny little sliver of Americans are going to be hurt and come out behind. 13 million low and middle income Americans are facing an immediate tax hike of $100 or more because of the bill. Apparently, in the president's view, 13 million Americans is a little tiny sliver. That's just the immediate impact. The bill gets worse and worse for middle-class folks with each passing year. 2027 is when the numbers put your jaw on the floor. Under this plan that the president says is so fantastic, 150 million middle-class taxpayers either get a couple of crumbs or they're hit with an outright tax hike. I'm going to say that once more. 150 million Americans get nothing but crumbs or an outright tax hike. That's what the president calls a tiny little sliver. It's pretty close to 90% of the middle class. And that's just the raw math of who's facing a tax hike. As I've said, this bill drives a dagger into the heart of the Affordable Care Act. 13 million Americans are going to lose their health care. Tens of millions will get hit with a hidden tax hike in the form of higher insurance premiums. And then, of course, we all understand that the coverage requirement in the Affordable Care Act that Senate Republicans seek to remove is what makes it possible for us to get loophole-free, airtight protection for those who faced discrimination when they had a pre-existing condition. So this is pretty troubling stuff, and it sure doesn't strike me, Mr. President, that when this administration says only a tiny little sliver of people are going to get hurt, that the reality shows something very different. The fact is, after all the giveaways to the multinational corporations and the well-connected and the high flyers, this bill is going to cost more than $1 trillion. It is a real head-scratcher how you can spend so much money, help so few people, and convince yourself what you're doing is so terrific. Peddling the idea that there's just a tiny little sliver of people out there who don't benefit from this tax plan, in my view, is preposterous, and the tens of millions of Americans this bill is going to hurt deserve far better. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I would note the absence of a quorum.
And the clerk should call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.